Welcome back to the channel. Before we start the video, I would like to say sorry for the week of no uploads and thank you all for your support. I'll be doing a 100 sub special soon. Today we will travel through the pages of What If Issei Was Born with 4 Powers Part 3. The link to the story will be in the description below. Now let's start. The rest of the week passed by relatively quickly for Issei. After school, he made it a habit to go to the Orc, short for Occult Research Club, with his friend Kibayudo being the one escorting him there. During his brief stay there, Riaz told him the story of devils and about their civil war, which led to the creation of the Evil Pieces system by one of the current 4 great Mau, Ajuka Beelzebub. Not to mention that the devils were divided into the old Mau faction and the current 4 great Mau. She also explained to him, in detail, the rating game system. Oh. He had also exchanged numbers with the devil girls as well, should he need anything, and he was in the middle of a crowd, or them for that matter. After all, due to his contract with Riaz, he could produce a small red magic circle to communicate directly with her. And, lastly, due to his connection with a devil, Riaz in this particular case, he would be able to speak every known language without a problem, as if he had gained the tongue trait the devils, as well as all the supernatural species, had from their birth. Apart from that, he didn't need to go to a contract, which he didn't care much about, for the time being. That said, he needed to talk to Sona at some point for his job as the Kendo Club's shushu. He couldn't stand the poorly concealed fear of the girls in the club. He could handle it in class because there he was distracted from the teachings and lectures. So, he wanted to stop his job. On a side note, only the perverted duo seemed to have recovered from their fear of him, albeit somewhat, as they continuously wished for his death because, in their words, he still stole the attention from all the girls, even if said girls were apprehensive towards him. Nothing else noteworthy happened during the week. At school, that is. On Friday, Issei announced to his parents that he would have a date on Sunday. Correction. His first date. Yeah. Not his brightest idea, but he didn't have much of a choice since he needed to be out of the house all day, even at dinner, without making his mother worry to death. Predictably, his father was over the moon, congratulating him over and over again, while crying what Goru thought as manly tears, when, instead, they were anime waterfalls. That, and the Haidu patriarch gave his own advice to his son in a comically animated manner. The Kane, however, demanded that she would get to know her future daughter-in-law as soon as possible to get a gauge on how many grandbabies said daughter-in-law would be able to give birth to for herself to spoil. And she wouldn't take no for an answer. While comically eccentric, Issei couldn't have expected another kind of reaction from his parents. That said, he loved them unconditionally. On a totally different note, his tenants had decided to go even harder on him in their spars. They never gave him an answer as to why they did so, which only added to his continuously rising frustration. He still needed to vent. The exhibition match against Kiba didn't count. Issei needed to find a walking, talking punching bag that could take a serious beating and get up without a scratch for him to release all the accumulated frustration on. Call it a gut feeling, but, somewhere in the back of his mind, the brunette knew he would acquire said punching bag in the near future. Anyway. Issei woke up early on Sunday in order to get ready for his date with his fallen angel stalker, Amano Yuma, or Rainer as it was her real name. Thankfully, Goru had given him plenty of advice already, which only added to his original plan to keep the date simple. On a side note, despite the brunette's refusal, he was given a hefty amount of 20,000 yen from his father to spend on the date. In all honesty, Issei didn't expect the date to have gone so well. He knew that, should he have been uninformed about his date's real identity and her possible motives regarding him, he would have fallen in love with her. Which, in the end, would have completely broken his heart should the outcome be the worst-case scenario. The brunette had a good time with Rainer in the role of Amano Yuma. Both were dressed casually, albeit the fallen in disguise allowed herself to be a little sexy as well. As for Issei, he couldn't find it in himself to not wear his scarf, so he matched his clothing according to the, mostly, white accessory. They went for an early lunch to a fast food restaurant, which was followed by a romantic movie to the cinema across the aforementioned facility. After that, they went shopping, where Issei, in a moment of momentary epiphany, bought a purple bracelet, which he put on her right wrist himself. Her reaction to that small gesture seemed genuine to his eyes. He could tell from how soft her thank you was that she meant it from her heart. Anyway. Then, the two went to the arcade, where they played some games. Both sucked at this, by the way, even if they had quickly understood how the games worked. Personally, the brunette had fun. Seemingly, Yuma shared the sentiment. It was right after they had dinner that Issei got suspicious. He suggested escorting her home after the aforementioned meal, but she declined his generous offer, albeit in a gentle way. Instead, she told him to go to the closest park to end their date. Issei was smart. So, he was very quick to catch on to her motive for going there. Thankfully, he had managed to hide the Gremory emblem on his right hand all day long. A pair of plain black sleeveless gloves had done the job magnificently as to avoid suspicion from the fallen angel. He didn't show it, but he didn't like that the worst case scenario was about to happen. The fact that he was, mentally, prepared for it didn't mean it hurt him any less. Well, it did, but didn't completely erase the pain in his heart. The brunette suppressed a sigh of resignation at what was about to happen when Yuma-chan, as he called her throughout the date, giddily, stood up from their bench and skipped towards the fountain, asking him to do something to commemorate their date. Not because of the action itself, but due to him noticing the sky changing color to a royal purple color and the moon glowing an ominous dark red color as she stood before the fountain, facing him with a sweet smile on her face. Unfortunately, Amano Yuma or Rainer had erected a barrier that separated the entire park, including themselves, from the rest of the world. On a side note, barriers in general were another one of Ria's lessons about the supernatural world that the brunette was thankful about. Which was how he knew about what was happening to his surroundings in the first place. Idly, he noted that his senses of smell and hearing worked the same as always, with the only difference being he could smell and hear everything inside the barrier and not outside of it. Something which also meant that he couldn't command his sword to come to him. It was an interesting observation, which would be tested more at a later time. Issei forced himself to stop thinking in order to answer her question. Also, to his credit, he did it with a sweet smile of his own. "What is it, Yuma-chan?" Despite the suggestive look she had in her eyes, Yuma's sweet smile turned into a viciously malicious smirk as she spoke in the sweetest tone she had spoken with the entire day. "Will you die for me?" It was because Issei noticed all these contradictions that he was visibly very surprised, almost to the point of being shocked. He was incredibly smart, but he wasn't an actor. Apparently, the fallen in disguise before him was as viciously cunning as he was smart because she hadn't given any signs of her acting throughout the day. Or, more accurately, Issei wasn't able to pick up that she had been acting all day. In the end, he regrettably realized that the only true sentiment that she had expressed was when he had given her the bracelet. Unaware and uncaring of the brunette's thoughts, Yuma transformed in her fallen angel form, becoming Rainer. She seemed to bask in his shocked state as she laughed in a mockingly sweet tone and went on a monologue concerning their date as she took a seat on top of the fountain, with the glowing moon giving her an eerie glow as well. Issei didn't hear any of it. He didn't hear her degrading comment of their date being like playing house with him or her introducing herself in her real name. He didn't hear anything. She was about to say something else when Issei regained his composure and, after he lightly shook his head, he spoke in a soft, even tone that managed to silence her. Although, his facial expression was hidden by his front bangs and his eyes were closed underneath the veil of his front hair. Was it a lie, Rainer? The fallen angel narrowed her eyes in suspicion at his odd behavior. "What do you mean, Issei-kun?" Rainer was bewildered when he raised his left hand and, without even looking at her, she followed the direction of his pointer finger, pointing straight at her purple bracelet. She felt her heart stop for a moment before her eyes narrowed dangerously at him. "What about the bracelet?" she demanded, her voice turning to steel, hiding her true emotions. "Were your words and sentiments, at that moment, lies as well?" the brunette softly asked before he stood up from the bench as well. He let his arms fall to his sides, still hiding his expression from her. Rainer gritted her teeth in frustration. Of course, they weren't. Actually, it was the first time that one of her seduce and kill targets gave her a gift. No one, her organization included, had given her even the smallest of tokens. Yet, this boy did, with a smile on his face to boot. Speaking of whom, her superior had explicitly told her to monitor the boy before her and report back to him before she was dismissed to start the mission. However, somewhere along the way, without her knowledge as to how or why, her orders changed. Apparently, she was to kill the boy and the rest didn't matter right now. Right now, she had to kill the boy. All of these thoughts took only a second for Rainer to process. That said, her pride as a supposedly superior being held her back from being honest to her soon-to-be dead boyfriend. Or was it my ex-boyfriend? Anyhow, she kept her silence. After all, whatever conclusion he would come to, it wouldn't matter when he would have a hole in his heart via her light spear. Speaking of which, she conjured one in her right hand and got ready to throw it, but not before telling him the reason she was going to kill him. He deserved this much. "Goodbye, Issei-kun. Blame God for placing a sacred gear in you," she announced in a sweetly cruel tone before she threw it straight at his heart. She watched as her pinkish light spear traveled at high speed towards her target's heart. The fallen angel was left utterly gobsmacked when the brunette avoided her deadly weapon by leaning to his right without even looking. What? How is that possible? No normal human should be able to do that. she thought in disbelief before horrifying realization struck her mind. Unless he has already awakened his sacred gear and he's powerful enough to deal with low-ranking supernatural species, like myself. Since you want to kill me, Issei's calm and soft voice drew her attention, making her shiver in trepidation. I have to capture and deliver you to Gremory Rhea-san. After all, as her contracted magician, I'm obligated to do so. His words managed to make her heart stop for a couple of seconds. Yet, her mind ran 10 miles a minute. Say what now, he's a magician on top of having an awakened sacred gear and he's contracted to the Gremory bitch fuck. I'm not just screwed. I'm fucking dead meat. I need to get out of here, ASAP. The others must know about this as well. Her rampant thoughts contradicted her body as it refused to listen to her mind. Especially when the brunette started taking soundless steps towards her position. Something that triggered another train of dreadful thoughts. Come to think of it, apart from the times he had to make any noise, he was otherwise soundless, as impossible as it sounds. And he was pretty warm too. Way warmer than any normal human should be, especially at this time of year. Maybe it's his sacred gear. Or a weird combination of his magic and his sacred gear. In the time she had to process her thoughts, Issei had reached the base of the fountain, directly beneath her, still not even looking at her. Rainer, for her part, just looked at him in sheer disbelief. The sentiment that grew to impossible levels when the brunette's left arm stretched all the way above her head, which she followed with her eyes, staring at the clenched fist in a mixture of horrified fascination and bewilderment. Wait. What's that black shiny essence covering his fist? Gum pistol. Issei's soft announcement echoed throughout the eerily silent park. Then, with a resounding snap, it retracted back to its normal length, but not before striking the fallen angel's temple with enough strength to knock her out cold. Even if she could have known it would happen, Rainer couldn't have reacted in time due to the shock she was experiencing. Issei projected both his arms for the female fallen to stop on them, not in the fountain's water. As he felt her entire weight on his arms, he adjusted her position in a bridal carry. Fortunately, her large wings had retracted in her body during her free fall, which made his job way easier. Thanks to his ears and nose, he could tell that the barrier had fallen as soon as he knocked her out. The brunette was just standing at the base of the fountain, holding the unconscious Rainer, with his expression hidden under his front hair. He didn't know why, but he felt like crying. The only thing holding him back from doing so was the fact that Rainer hadn't answered his question. He hoped that her answer would have been a negative one, since her non-reply left him conflicted. Or, at the very least, hopeful as to get an answer out of her when she would wake up. And, hopefully, he would be able to persuade Rhea to leave Rainer alive after the former's interrogation. In all honesty, Issei would have preferred to do the interrogation on his own and let the fallen angel go afterwards, but that would be a problem to his alliance with the devils. But those thoughts replaying over and over again, Issei turned around very slowly before he started walking towards Kuo Academy's direction, trying in vain to calm his rampant mind. As he walked, as usual, he made no sound whatsoever. Thus, he wasn't seen by any pairs of eyes as he was lost in the darkness of the night. What is it, Lucifer-sama? Oh, nothing of great significance, Grafia. Just a report from my cute little sister. If you don't mind me asking, what does it say, Surziches-sama? Two beings called Surziches Lucifer and Grafia Lucifuge were discussing in the Mau's office. The former being elegantly nonchalant, recognized as one of the 10 strongest beings in this universe by reality itself. The latter was formal and stoic, dressed in a maid's outfit, while also being the wife and queen of the former. Do you remember that my Rhea-tan signed a contract with a magician named Issei Haidu just a few days ago? Yes, Surziches-sama. Do you also remember a report that said some fallen angels had taken Kuo Town's abandoned church for their base of operations, along with some stray exorcists? Yes. But, am I to assume that these two are connected? Correct. Apparently, one of the reasons these fallen angels became residents of the same town as my Rhea-tan was this magician, Issei Haidu. Grafia raised an elegant silver eyebrow at the mysterious smile her husband was wearing. And? She probed. It says here that Issei Haidu was presumed to be wielder of a sacred gear. At least, from the fallen angels. And you assume that it is not the case, my lord? Not exactly. Surziches sighed lightly before turning to his wife. Rhea is aware that her arranged marriage is being pushed by her parents and the Phoenix family as of late. Yet, she didn't reincarnate this magician in her peerage, and there are 2 possibilities for that. Either this magician is too strong for her to reincarnate as a devil, or this magician wants to have some independence. He took a breath and returned his gaze at the report he had just read, his voice turning more serious. This report here supports my second assumption on the matter. Apparently, the leader of the group of the fallen angels in Kuo, Rainer, was captured by Issei after she tried to kill him at the end of their date for interrogation. I won't bore you with the details, Grafia, but from what Riaz writes in here, in the end, Issei was the person responsible for this Rainer to go away unharmed. Grafia's eyebrow twitched at that. Though, Serzich's continued as his eyes read the report again and again. Thankfully, it was only through an argument and not a fight. He sighed in relief at that. Though, he would have to pay a visit to the human world to get to know Issei. Just in case. And when Grafia would have a day off, he wouldn't have to worry about his ears lengthening anytime soon. It says here that the fallen angel's orders were changed through unknown means during her third day in Kuo. She was to kill Issei. However, this boy defeated her without the use of a sacred gear, only with pure skill. At least, according to the report. So, to answer your question, I don't know if this Issei has a sacred gear. If he does, then Riaz doesn't know what it is, or she knows and wants to keep it a secret for some reason. Riaz's brother sighed as he paused from his monologue and turned his chair to face his wife with the report in hand. All the while Grafia just looked at him stoically. As if this situation isn't complicated enough, there is another person the fallen in Kuo are interested in. Asia Argento, bearer of twilight healing and a recently excommunicated holy maiden. She is to arrive at Kuo in the next few days. Apparently, Azazel's original orders were to retrieve the Holy Maiden, but changed to extract her sacred gear for Rainer to keep if she so wanted and leave Argento's body to the church for somebody else to pick it up. Grafia's eyes widened just a tad to show surprise on what she had just heard. What the changed order for this Asia Argento entailed didn't sound like something Azazel would order his minions to do. After all, the man was known for his recent obsession with sacred gears and alive specimens wielding said trinkets. Seeing her expression, Serzich's continued his monologue. According to the report, Issei protected Rainer's life by stating that she was manipulated to go to her death and, while Riaz would be occupied with Rainer and her group, the culprit would go away unnoticed. I agree with his logic and even his plan. Upon seeing his wife's confused expression, he elaborated. He had Rainer report to her group that she had killed him and then try to contact Azazel to tell him directly what was going on. After that, she is to meet my sister, her peerage and Issei to discuss what to do. Meaning that tonight will be the meeting between them. Although, I suspect that Riaz will involve Sona for the sole reason that the latter is kept updated. Serzich's sighed, again, as he finished his monologue. He heard Grafia hum, whether in approval or skepticism for this Issei person, he didn't know. Unfortunately, she didn't offer her opinion on the matter. That's enough paperwork for today, Serzich's Sama. You may go and take a rest. Fortunately, he was given a free pass for the rest of the day and his ears wouldn't hurt, particularly his left one. It was the end of classes for the Kuo Academy students. Issei didn't wait for Kiba to come and fetch him, opting to go to the orc by himself. According to his senses, he was right to do so because he heard various boys and girls crying out their jealousy over a certain girl, from another school no less, being escorted by the Prince of Kuo. On a side note, the brunette was glad that, for once, Mitsuda and Motohama directed their anger towards another person than himself. It didn't matter that his friend was the perverted duo's target. What he didn't expect on his way there was to smell Sona and Tsubaki being in the orc with Riaz, Akeno and Kaneko. It made sense to him, though. After all, Sona shared her position with Riaz as an overseer and protector of Kuo. The brunette didn't even knock on the door when he entered, not caring about the dubious gazes he got from Riaz and Akeno or the disapproving ones from Sona and Tsubaki. Welcome Ice. Please, make yourself at home. Riaz told him kindly, trying to hide her irritated sarcasm. Hello, everyone. He ignored her and also ignored Akeno's teasing giggles directed at the Redeed, who pouted like a child. Internally, he admitted that Riaz was cute, but this wasn't the time. The brunette's serious gaze fell on the nervous Rainer, who was in her Amano uniform, who was sitting at the same couch as yesterday, with Riaz and Sona opposite of her. Akeno and Tsubaki were standing behind their kings, and Kiba was leaning himself on the wall beside the window and reading a book. Kaneko was being herself at Ria's right. Issei was mildly surprised that his friend sent him a wave and a smile as a greeting. Even Kaneko acknowledged him with a nod, which he returned in kind for both cases. Again, his eyes landed on Rainer, who, after seeing him, appeared to be a little less nervous and even sent him a weak smile, for a reason that completely eluded him. Inside Issei, both dragons and Jetsu facepped him to hide their suffering. He ignored them as he took a seat on the couch Rainer occupied, in a way that he had visual contact with everyone present, facing the fallen angel in the room. So, what happened, Rainer? He asked conversationally. Rainer shook her head lightly. I couldn't contact Azazel-sama yesterday, or even today, Ice-kun. Why is that? Sona inquired stoically, not quite believing the fallen angel in the room. Rainer shrugged helplessly as she answered honestly. I couldn't get through the communication circle. An outside source must be interfering with my communication system. Issei turned to face the two heiresses to gauge their reactions at that bit of information. Judging from their slightly troubled expressions, it seemed that the fallen angel next to him was saying the truth. Something that made him internally glad that his assumption of Rainer being one of the many victims taking part in a scheme that she had no idea about being correct. The scheme he was able to uncover, albeit a very small part, thanks to his very sharp mind. Can you try again now, just to make sure you're not lying? Riaz practically demanded, even if it came out as a request. In response, Rainer turned her head towards Issei and took the hair that covered her right ear away from it to showcase her point. Then, she conjured a violet circle, the size of her ear, that glowed dully for a couple of seconds, before abruptly shattering. The Keno's, Tsubaki's, Sona's and Ria's eyes widened in surprise for a moment before they narrowed in suspicion, increasing Rainer's nervousness in the process. Tiba narrowed his eyes as well, but didn't say anything. Kaneko stopped munching for a second as she emotionlessly looked at Rainer before she returned to her snacks. As for Issei, the brunette was the only calm person in the room, excluding Kaneko. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he had expected this to happen. After all, Rainer was being used as a convenient scapegoat while also playing the role of a loose end. So, it made sense that the culprit wouldn't let her come in contact with her leader. So, in a sense, Rainer and her group were on their own until Azazel was informed in some way or another. Don't worry, Rainer. Issei's calm and reassuring voice drew the attention of the room. The reason you're here is that we find a way for you and your group to leave this town in peace. Sona, as usual, was the first to speak after a statement like that as she faced him. So, Haidu-kun, what do you suggest? She asked, purposely avoiding to add that this was his idea in the first place. The brunette was thankful that he had thought of this possibility to happen at lunch break, so he was ready to answer as he still faced the fallen angel. You'll continue with your business as if nothing happened. If somebody from your group tries anything without your knowledge, we know, I'll deal with them. That said, you have to contact Ria-san, should that happen, to let us know beforehand. The same goes for when you, or any one of us, come in contact with Asia Argento. We contact each other first, then we decide on what to do. He explained seriously. Even Sona blinked in genuine surprise. Did you think this on the fly, Haidu-kun? Don't get me wrong, but even though it's a good starting plan, it's vague and full of holes. Issei knew that and narrowed his eyes in irritation as he looked at the student council president. It wasn't on the fly, Sona-san. I thought of it during lunch break in case this possibility happened, which unfortunately did. Also, neither me nor anyone in this room have enough information as to whom we're dealing with or even their motives behind this scheme. He said as calmly as he could, trying not to fume due to his own words. The next communicated none. Himself and a group of low-ranked fallen angels. The first two were both the targets and the collateral damage. The latter were the scapegoats and the loose ends that needed to be tied up. And what better way to put them in the territory managed by not one, but two Devil House heiresses. God fucking damn it. He had too little information on this grand scheme and he had to play it safe. For all of their sakes. Mainly the major three girls involved, Sona, Riaz and Rainer. The meeting didn't last much longer after his outburst. After all, nobody in the room seemed eager to prolong this meeting any more than necessary in case of agitating the fairly easily excitable brunette. Riaz and Rainer begrudgingly worked together on a communication circle between the two of them, albeit in silence. Tsubaki and Akeno were content to just observe them in silence, with the latter being a little cold in her demeanor whenever she landed her eyes on the fallen angel in the room. Issei took notice of that particular detail, but, for the sake of his sanity, he decided not to pry. Tiba and Kaneko were their usual side character selves, not taking part in the aforementioned event. As the meeting came to an end, Sona stood up from the couch and, after bidding her farewells to everyone but the brunette, she made her way to the door, followed by Tsubaki. Everyone, even Tsubaki and Kaneko, were surprised when she stopped just as she touched the doorknob and addressed Issei. Haidu-kun. Tomorrow, you're eating lunch at the student council. Farewell, for now. As the door opened and closed, signaling Sona's departure, an awkward silence ensued as all heads faced a visibly confused brunette who stared at the door as if it would give him an answer as to what Sona was thinking by telling him that. Rainer was the first to recover from the silence with an awkward giggle, which sounded cute in her Yuma form. I hadn't taken you for a multi-dating person, Ice-kun, she teased to lighten the mood. Thankfully, it seemed to cut the tension as another person took the message. ARAUFUFU I didn't think that Icekun was such a naughty boy, I think this calls for PUNISHMENT, even though she was trying to play along, Akeno actually meant what she said. Pervert. Kaneko's harsh words were accompanied with a mild glare to express her disapproval. Biba just chuckled awkwardly, not willing to accidentally agitate his friend. Riaz resisted the urge to fassip him and settled to groan in exasperation as she hid her face in her hands, which covered her blushed cheeks. Haha. Very funny. Issei just deadpanned at the two girls, not falling for their teasing. Then, with a sigh, he stood up, ignoring the two brunettes giggling, as well as the white-hair girl's earlier jab at his integrity, and got ready to leave. Do you need me for anything else, Riaz-san? He asked Aridit in a formal manner. Riaz was internally thankful for the change in the subject. She might be okay with her own nudism, but she was as innocent as a puppy on anything sex-related. No ice. From what I know, there won't be a contract for you tonight either. So, you may go home. She dismissed him in a gentle way. Okay. Issei nodded in acknowledgement and, after bowing his head, he left the same way he always did. Riaz breathed a sigh of exasperation before her eyes landed on Rainer, who stared intensely at the door Issei had just left. What is it, Rainer? She asked formally to hide her irritation at the fallen's presence. Rainer turned her head to face the Redid, her expression all serious. How does he do that? She asked. Ria's irritation died down at the question because she understood what the brunette was asking about, which was something she wanted to know as well. Issei hasn't told any of us yet. That said, it is something that I myself am curious about. She answered honestly. Rainer just nodded and left immediately after that. After all, despite cooperating with them, she didn't like being in the presence of devils for extended periods of time. Ria sighed again as she took a seat at her desk and got ready to start on her UGG paperwork. It hadn't even been 10 minutes from Rainer's departure when the newly crafted communication circle buzzed on Ria's right ear. Despite her annoyance at being interrupted, the Redid answered calmly. Though, she had a feeling it wasn't for something good. What happened, Rainer? The reply was instant and to the point. Gremory, a fallen angel from my group, just got out to personally check on Icekun. His name is Donaseek. Ria sighed as she rubbed the bridge of her nose, mentally cursing her accurate feeling. Great, just great. Issei was in his room, sitting on his desk, and had just finished his homework when Kiba called him. The brunette was a bit surprised, considering he had been at the Orc for the better part of the afternoon. He had hoped that he would be left at his own devices for the rest of the day, but, apparently, fate had other plans. In the form of a fallen angel, called Donaseek. The guy was out in search of him. In Issei's mind, this fallen angel was conspiring against Rainer, though influenced by a third party. Said third party was, probably, someone higher in the chain of command, almost close to Azazel. Otherwise, neither Donaseek nor anybody else from Rainer's group would have listened. Logically, at least. That said, it begged the question. How many people, fallen or humans, from Rainer's group were like Donaseek? Issei frowned in frustration. Again, he had too little information to go on. And he couldn't risk doing anything drastic to expose Rainer to the third party. Neither could he go and beat up Donaseek and then put the blame on Riaz or Sona. If he did that, there was a chance of igniting another great war, with Kuo being the center of it. He couldn't have that. He wanted peace. Especially in Kuo, where his parents resided. Lastly, for all he knew, the third party was actually hoping for a great war. And who knew how many accomplices they had watching their back. With all that in mind, Issei decided to play the waiting game. Asia Argento was to arrive in 2 days. Once he made contact with the excommunicated nun, he would see what could be done. And, hopefully, Rainer would remain on their side until the end of this scheme. The scheme that the brunette very much doubted that would end so quickly. The culprit or culprits would, most definitely, lay low after this whole thing blew off. He was certain that they would strike again in the future. In conclusion, all Issei could do was wait for the right time to end this in one fell swoop. All of these thoughts were related to Kiba, who, in turn, relayed them to Riaz, who, in turn, would relay them to Sona. He didn't need their approval of his thought process, he was sure he had it right. Nor did he care much for their worry over the whole matter. Issei sighed in frustration, again, as he rubbed his temple. He almost jumped in surprise when he heard a voice in his head, but regained his composure immediately. You're stressed, partner. You noticed? Was the brunette's snarky response to Drake's nonchalant comment. Yes. The dragon didn't seem offended. Lately, you're sighing a lot more. He added his observation as an afterthought. True to the dragon's words, Issei sighed again before he spoke. I've got a lot in my mind, as I'm sure you've seen, Drake. And, in case you didn't notice, you and Zangetsu are part of the reason why I'm stressed, what with you two trying to make me understand that killing other beings will be the norm in the future, near or otherwise. Even though he was serious, it was clear that he was equally irritated and frustrated. You know that we're doing this for you, right? Zangetsu interjected, sounding more than a little annoyed by his wielder. So, stop being a little bitch and man the fuck up. I don't care that you're a fucking teenager. Ichigo was the same age as you when he had started to fight for everyone's sakes, and he didn't have the amount of power you possess from the get-go. Ichigo had to gain all his power, the one you have in your possession, through many hardships and deadly battles, and never, even once, did he fucking complain about it. Yet, here you are, bitching and moaning because you don't want to kill anyone. Newsflash, boy. In the supernatural world, it's kill or be killed, whether you like it or not. An awkward silence followed after the sword spirit's quite explosive rant. Drake, though, seemed to hum in agreement with Zangetsu. Something that the brunette noticed but decided to not comment on. Then he brought his open palms on his eye level as he spoke out loud in a forlorn tone, though quiet enough to not be heard by his parents. I didn't ask for all this power. Yes, I need all this power to protect the world, or even just my parents. However, I didn't ask for it in the first place. Nor was I asked by anyone. It was bestowed to me even before I was a full baby inside my mother's belly. He took a calming breath before leaning back on his chair to stare at the room's ceiling as he continued. Ichigo, on the other hand, actually had the choice given to him, and he took it with open arms. He wasn't burdened with the protection of his world. He took it upon himself to protect his world with as many allies as he could get in the process. You demand of me to be the same, Zangetsu, but you forget one thing. I'm not Ichigo Kurosaki. I'm Issei Haidu. I accepted the power that was given to me because I had no choice and because I actually want peace. That said, I accept to become this world's #1 protector, like Ichigo in his own world, but I'll do it my way, not yours or even Drake. If I have to kill somebody in the future to achieve peace, then I'll do it, even if it turns my heart to stone and deal with the aftermath myself. Or, even better, have you two to help me through it. Issei's rant was followed by another silence, though it felt comfortable in comparison to the first one. He hadn't even noticed that he sounded determined in the middle of his rant, with his expression matching his words. Damn it, I hate it when mere teenagers make more sense than they should. Issei smirked victoriously as he heard Zangetsu's complaint. He could see him, figuratively, pouting in frustration like a child that didn't have its way with something it wanted from its parents. Well said, partner. Drake hummed in acknowledgement, making Issei's smirk widen a fraction. You just earned a round of lessons as to which individuals deserve death as the only way to get rid of them. The same goes for people that aren't like the fallen angel, Rainer, who listen to reason and change their ways accordingly. So, get ready, partner, because we start tonight. Issei's face fell upon hearing the warning, as well as what his next lessons would be. Also, Issei was certain that, even though the dragon didn't say it, those lessons would be accompanied, or followed, by even deadlier spars. Great, he sighed in defeat. ISE come down, HONEY dinners REATY. Thankfully, Issei was reminded by Akane's melodious voice that he had until after dinner to prepare himself. So, he stood up and called out with a smile on his face at the thought of his mother's mouth-watering food. Coming, Ka-chan. On lunch break came the next day, Issei headed to the SCO short for student council office, as Sona had told him the day before when she left from the orc. Well, more like demanded, but the brunette didn't mind. After all, he had wanted to talk to Sona since his exhibition match against Kiba. The brunette knocked the door 3 times, ignoring the curious gazes and the rumors whispered by some of the other students as he waited for Sona to give him the okay to enter. Thankfully, it seemed that it was only her and Tsubaki in the room. Enter. He opened the door and closed it behind him, and he noticed that Sona was behind her desk, utensils in hand as she ate from a bento box that was on the aforementioned ornament. Tsubaki was enjoying her own food at the coffee table, sitting on the couch to his right. Welcome, Haidu-kun. Sona's business-like tone brought him out of his observations. Take a seat. She gestured at one of the 2 chairs in front of her, specifically the one that would allow him vision to Tsubaki as well. He did as was told with just a nod of his head. Unlike before, Issei didn't start a stare-off with Sona as he took his seat and prepared to eat his own lunch. Sona took notice of the small detail, but decided to not comment on it. After swallowing his first bite, the brunette spoke without looking at the student council president, his gaze at his food. I'm sure you know of my contract with Ria-san, Sona-san. He said airily. Yes. Sona nodded, her eyes on him as she ate, ignoring the fact that he showed no respect to her position. She knew she had lost his respect and she had to earn it back. Is there a problem with your contract? she asked professionally in order to continue the conversation. No. Issei shook his head. He swallowed another mouthful before he raised his head to face Sona, his expression stoic to hide his emotions. He didn't want her to read him like a book. It's a pretty good deal, considering the payment I'll get even from one contract a month. However, I want to use my contract with Ria-san as an excuse to quit from being the shushu at the kendo club. He explained. I cannot say I did not expect something like that to happen. Sona replied, much to his curiosity. Even if you hadn't signed a contract with Ria's Haidu-kun, I was expecting you to resign from the kendo club. After all, after my mistake with the exhibition match, I have been informed by my servants that you are feared by all students and teachers. Even some of my servants fear you, unfortunately. And, at this point, I cannot do anything to reverse my mistake, the reputation of one of the top students being destroyed by the student council president herself. For all that, the least I owe you is an apology, and I hope you find it in you to forgive me and, sometime in the future, allow me to make amends, in every way you see fit. She ended her heartfelt admission with a bow of her head. Tsubaki's eyes widened a bit from the shock of seeing Sona bowing to a human and asking for forgiveness. Then, she regained her composure and, with a smile that no one saw, she continued to eat her food in silence. As for the brunette, he didn't show any outward reaction. Because, on the inside, he was hurting very much due to the reminder of practically everyone's fear of him. Honestly, he wanted to forgive Sona, but couldn't find in him to do so, even though he was interested in her. Not yet, at least. He also saw through her attempt to gain his respect. At the very least, her first step in that direction was the right one. Alright. Apology accepted, Sona-san. He simply said. Sona raised her head to meet his eyes, hiding a bitter smile under her mask of professionalism. Thank you, Haidu-kun. They ate the rest of their food in silence, and they noticed that there were 10 minutes to spare. Is there something else you want to address before I take my leave, Sona-san? Issei asked stoically as he prepared to leave. Sona was about to say no, but held herself back at the last moment because she remembered a request from her friend. In Ria's words, she had more of a possibility to get an answer out of the brunette. Though, Sona, despite her intelligence or because of it, believed that it was the other way around. That said, she decided to try her luck. Actually, Haidu-kun, there is a matter that I am curious about you. She said conversationally. Issei raised an eyebrow in curiosity. What? Sona fixed her glasses in a way that reflected the light of the room for a moment, giving her an ominous vibe. How are you able to move without making a sound? She asked. At her question, time seemed to stop for Issei as his painful memories resurfaced and hit him with the force of a speeding train. His stoic expression, during that second he was flooded with his own memories, didn't break in the slightest. He had been a very carefree child when he was younger. However, his sheer speed and physical strength made the other kids his age, including their parents, to fear him. And, as a result, he was left alone. Then, Rin came into his life and filled that loneliness, only to make it worse when she had to move to England. The kids continued to fear him and all but shunned him, with the teachers and his parents being completely unable to help him. So, in order to be able to come close to others without making them fear him, he subconsciously tried his best to be as quiet as possible. He did it so much that he adapted to that style and couldn't even bring himself to come out of it in fear that other people would notice him and avoid him like a deadly virus. All in all, it was one of the reasons he didn't want that kind of power in the first place. Even if heroes grew up alone and he was aspiring to be one when he was younger, he would have preferred to be able to make more friends and be normal. All of these thoughts passed through the brunette's mind in just a second. And, as mentioned before, his expression didn't break in the slightest. His heart, however, was another story. Without her knowing, Sona hurt him more than she could have imagined with her question. Issei closed his eyes and turned around, starting to take his leave, with his expression being hidden by his front hair. Both Sona and Tsubaki noticed the change in his demeanor, but waited for his answer. He did so once he opened the door, his voice stoic as it had been at the earlier conversation. I've told you once, Sona-san. There is a thing called privacy and I like mine. With that, he exited the room, closing the door behind him. Once they thought he was out of earshot, Tsubaki turned her head to speak to Sona, but noticed her shocked expression and became bewildered. What is it, Sona? Sona didn't answer her immediately. Her eyes stared at the door Issei had just left. Or, more accurately, the spot Issei stood before he exited. There, on the carpet, she saw a small wet spot that hadn't been there as far as she remembered. Tsubaki Sona gulped as she couldn't take her eyes off that wet spot, making the other girl even more bewildered. Especially since, along with shock, Sona's expression showed genuine regret. I think that I've made another horrible mistake at the same time. Issei had heard Sona loud and clear, even through all the noise the other students made. He so wanted to not return to his classes, but knew he couldn't do that. Not because he would have lost something valuable from the teachers. But because he would get detention and Sona, or somebody else from the student council, would be the supervisor. And, honestly, the brunette didn't want to be anywhere near the student council and, most importantly, Sona. So, in the same way he always moved, Issei went back to his classroom and paid no one any mind. On a side note, his classmates seemed to notice his mood and didn't even look at him. Even the perverted duo didn't send their usual curses in his direction. At the end of school, Issei didn't wait for Kiba to come and fetch him, as it was the norm. Instead, without making any noise, the brunette packed up his things and left the school premises. On his way out, everyone saw his expression being hidden by his front hair. The orc, mostly Kiba and Riaz, were left confused as to why the brunette didn't join them that day. However, they decided to leave him on his own devices and didn't try to contact him. Issei had walked aimlessly for some time and, when he decided to open his eyes and see where he was, he noticed that he had entered the park and ended his date with Rainer. More specifically, he had sat on the same bench he and the fallen angel had used a few days ago. The park didn't have many people at this time, which was something he liked as he preferred to be alone when he was emotionally distraught. Essentially, he noticed that the fallen angel under the name Donaseek was nowhere near him. In fact, the guy seemed to be at the abandoned church, according to his nose. Again, this was a good thing. He didn't want to deal with anything else that day. HAWA. Issei opened his eyes at the sound of a young girl squealing in surprise, followed by a couple of thuds, and snapped his head in the direction he heard it. Immediately, he held himself back from cursing at fate, who didn't even leave him alone to brood. 20 meters away from him was a girl that had managed to trip in an impressively dumb manner. Her face was kissing the ground and her dark blue skirt had gone overhead to cover her upper half while she was on her knees and showed the world her plain white panties. On a side note, her figure seemed to be on the soft side, not the athletic one. Which meant that she kept her body in good shape through her diet alone. However, none of all the above was what irked Issei. It was because of her scent. Apart from a sweet fragrance that was her own, there was a hefty amount of rosemary coming off of her. It was a scent that Issei had connected to the people of a church. After all, Rin's father was a priest, as far as he remembered, and Rin carried some of his scent whenever they played. All these thoughts took not even 2 seconds to process in his mind. In conclusion, Issei knew that he was getting an eyeful of Asia Argento's butt. With a defeated sigh, he stood up and, without making a sound, he went to help her up since no one else paid her any mind. The brunette boy pulled the skirt downwards to cover Asia's dignity before presenting his left hand to help her up. "Ah. Thank you, mister." The girl's grateful voice was sweeter than sugar as she was hoisted upwards with the ease of breathing. Once she was on her feet, she took a moment to dust off her clothes and, then, she sent her helper a beautifully cute and grateful smile. In the time the girl spent dusting off her clothes, Issei used it as a chance to examine her appearance. Asia had big, innocent light green eyes and straight blonde hair that reached to her mid-back. Also, she had an ahogue that complemented her cuteness. Her figure was rather slim and her skin was a healthy white. Lastly, even under her shirt, Issei could tell that the blonde seemed to have a decent, healthily developing bust. "It's nothing." Issei noticed that his own voice was far calmer than he thought it would come out, considering his previous mood. He could even feel himself smiling as he introduced himself. In fact, the longer he stared at and talked to her, the calmer he felt. It was as though his frustrations disappeared due to her mere presence, which, in hindsight, made sense, since she was a holy maiden. "I'm Haidu Issei. You can call me Issei or Ice." The girl's eyes widened in surprise for a moment before she flashed him with a smile that rivaled his mother's in terms of how beaming it was as she introduced herself. "I'm Asia. Asia Argento. Nice to meet you, Ai-san. I'm so glad that someone speaks the same language as me." Even her childish excitement calmed him down. This, Issei knew, wasn't normal, but it wasn't unwelcome either. The fact that he could hear her speak his language, even though he knew she was speaking Italian, made his day even more because he could understand what she said and vice versa. For the record, Asia's Ice-san equals Mr. Ice. "Nice to meet you too, Asia-chan." Issei held himself back from sounding affectionate at the last moment, coming out as conversational. Although, he couldn't stop the familiarity. Judging from the light dust of pink on her cheeks and the shy smile she wore, Issei felt that he wasn't entirely successful. Alas, he tried to find a way to change the subject so as to not embarrass the girl anymore, even though he liked her state. First impressions and all that. Fortunately, his eyes landed on her luggage and, thankfully, it was closed and hadn't spilled her belongings. "Traveling?" he simply asked. Asia's eyes widened a little at the reminder of her journey so far away from her home. "Ah. Yes. I was sent here from Italy because they assigned me to help the head priest of this town's church," she explained excitedly before she became embarrassed again. But since I can't speak Japanese, the people I asked directions couldn't help me and I don't know how to get there." Issei's smile widened a fraction at her unintended cuteness. "Don't you worry, Asia-chan. I know where the church is and I'll escort you there," he said casually. The blonde's eyes lit up in hope. "Ah, really?" Seeing him nod at her hopeful question, Asia's entire being oozed from gratefulness and excitement. Then, thank you, Ai-san. God must have sent you to my way to help me," she exclaimed as she made a praying motion with her hands. The brunette was amused by the nun's antics and almost laughed. However, he decided not to make her any more embarrassed and, instead, he went and picked up her luggage, as if they weighed nothing. The amazement and awe he saw in Asia's eyes just helped his mood to become even better. On their way to the abandoned church, the smiling duo did a stop because a 4-year-old boy fell and scraped his knee, crying his eyes out in waterfalls. Before Issei could react, Asia rushed at the boy, gently calming it down, even if the latter didn't understand at all. Then, to the brunette's amazement, Asia used her sacred gear, Twilight Healing, on the boy's knee and, a couple of seconds later, the injury was wiped clean. Not even a scar. The brunette thought to himself in a mixture of surprise and amazement, but showed only the former through his facial expression. "There. Big boys like you shouldn't cry." Asia smiled sweetly at the boy as she patted him comfortingly on his head in a sisterly fashion. The now amazed boy sprang up to his feet, seemingly more energized than before, and ran towards his mother. Though, at a small distance away, he turned around and, with a wide grin and a wave of his right hand, shouted gratefully. "Thank you, Wani-chan." Asia waved at the boy and kept her sweet smile in place. "He said thank you," Issei explained to her as he approached from behind with his own smile as he looked in the boy's direction, having recovered from his earlier sentiments. Asia stopped waving, but her smile widened at that. Then, she turned her whole body to face the brunette and in a childishly playful way, she stuck her tongue out of her mouth and lightly bonked her slightly tilted to the left head with her right hand as she spoke. "Sorry, but I had to." The brunette's smile widened at her antics. Though, he refrained from talking about her sacred gear, even if he was extremely interested in it. He had a feeling he would ruin the good mood. "It's alright, Asia-chan. Let's go," he said casually. Asia, for her part, was internally grateful that Issei didn't say anything about her gift. Because, even though she loved that she could help people with her gift, it was that same gift that excommunicated her from the church in Italy. Mentally shaking her head at those thoughts and focusing on her smiling guide, Asia nodded her head and followed him towards what she thought would be her new home. Their walk towards the church was a comfortably silent one. They were around 100 meters away when Asia was able to have a clear view of the church. Her serene smile widened at the sight and turned to thank her guide. And, if she was lucky, he would accept her invitation for tea. After all, Japanese people are known to love tea. "Here we are, Asia-chan," Issei announced calmly as he stopped walking, having noticed her expression. "Yes. Thank you, Ai-san," she exclaimed in childish gratefulness, beaming a matching smile. Her smile was infectious to him. And, even though he wanted to spend more time with Asia, he had to go back. After all, it would be counterproductive to go inside the church. So, he would meet her outside. "Asia-chan, I have to go home, but I will gladly meet you in a couple of days or 3 at the same park we met a few minutes ago because I'll be busy with school," he said kindly. Asia almost got a whiplash from her emotions. Even if it was just a moment, she felt extremely sad that the brunette wouldn't come with her inside. Then, she felt disappointed that she couldn't even make her invitation in the first place. However, all the negative feelings gave way to joy and hope when he suggested they meet each other again. In the end, she clung onto that hope and joy like a lifeline. "Yes, Ai-san. I'll meet you then," she exclaimed in excitement before she walked the rest of the way on her own with a little pep on her steps. Issei stayed there, waiting for Asia to enter the church before he turned around and left the hill with a smile on his face. A smile that disappeared when he remembered that he had to inform Riaz about his encounter with Asia. Damn. And he was in such a good mood. God bless Asia's gentle soul. With a dreadful sigh, Issei made a call to Kiba. Riaz took an elegant sip from Akeno's delicious tea as she sat, cross-legged, across from Issei at the orc. On her left was Akeno, who tasted her own tea with matching elegance. On Riaz's right was Kaneko, who, surprise surprise, was munching on some sweets. Across from Akeno was Kiba. The blonde boy took an elegant sip from the brunette's tea with one hand, while the other held one of his books he was immersed in. Thought his ears were on the others as well. Issei tasted Akeno's tea as well. Damn. He wasn't joking about his mother making him marry Kuo Academy's Yamato Nadeshiko. Also, it was what he needed to hydrate his throat after he gave them a summary for his encounter with Asia. I see. Ria said simply as she watched the brunette place his cup of tea on the coffee table. So, the fallen angels, even Rainer, have no idea that it was you who delivered Asia to them. Yeah. Issei nodded in acknowledgement. Unless Asia tells them, they won't know it was me. Why, though, Ice-kun? Kiba asked curiously, not taking his eyes from his book. That's a vague question with various answers. So, pick your why. The brunette deadpanned at his friend, who chuckled in amusement but wasn't the one to speak next. I believe that Udo-kun refers to why you didn't go inside the church with Argento-san, Haidu-kun. Akeno was clearly amused if the way she spoke was any indication. That said, she was somewhat serious as well. The brunette ignored the blonde's amused chuckles and faced Ria's and Akeno as he explained thoroughly, his face and tone serious. I didn't want anyone from the church to see me in order to make Rainer's lie believable to her group. And, since Rainer is their leader, I believe she's clever enough to order Asia not to tell anyone else about me. Donaseek hasn't found me, so I have the element of surprise. Even if Donaseek suspects Rainer's lie, he won't do anything drastic until the original culprit of the grand scheme gives the okay. Until then, hopefully, we, or rather I, have some time to plan Rainer's and Asia's escape from that church, with them, preferably, being unharmed. Rias and Akeno nodded in understanding at his explanation. Kiba gave a matching hum to show he listened as well. I have a question. All heads turned to Kaneko, who was the one to speak softly, albeit monotonously, staring at her in surprise that she spoke in the first place. The white-haired girl stared intensely at Issei as she spoke again. Why are you trying so hard to help a fallen angel? There was a pause, with the rest of the devils contemplating Kaneko's inquiry as well, even if it came out as a demand due to her monotone. Issei's expression remained serious as his gaze was locked with the half-yaokai. Because Rainer is as much of a victim in this grand scheme as me and Asia, not to mention, at the very least, some of her group. He explained as if it was obvious. Kaneko's eyes narrowed, although nobody could read the emotion within them, but said nothing. Instead, she just gave a nod and returned to her sweets, albeit with obvious agitation. Everyone noticed that she was ready to ask something else, but for some reason, she refrained from doing so. An awkward silence ensued after that small bit but broke when, suddenly, a magic circle appeared on Akeno's left ear and everyone's attention was on her. Issei was internally glad that the subject was about to change. And, judging from Akeno's serious expression, things were about to get interesting. On a side note, he guessed that these communication circles allowed the users to speak via telepathy. He was proven correct when Akeno turned to face Rias and announced what she was told. Rias, we have a stray devil in our territory and the Archduke wants it eliminated tonight. Issei frowned slightly at the eliminated part but didn't comment on it and returned to being serious. Perfect timing. Rias sighed in relief that the heavy conversation was put on hold. It seemed that his brief expression was missed by the smiling Redeed as she stood up and faced him. Issei held himself back from groaning in dejection. The mysterious smile Rias wore when she looked at him meant only one thing. She would invite him to join them and make him watch as they killed, mercilessly he believed, another devil. Ice, you should join us. After all, apart from our contract, it is a chance to show you a portion as to how we fight. Let it be known that Issei hated the fact that his gut was always right. Ah. Oh my. I didn't expect Haidu-kun to have such a weakness. Akeno, this isn't the time for your teasing. Ice, are you alright? Do I ga seem alright to you blurg? Right, sorry. Ice-kun, how much did you eat all day? Screw ga you, pretty boy bleh. Thank you, Ice-kun, but I'm into girls. Ja. Don't joke, you jackass ga. Issei senpai. You're disgusting. Blurg. Fuck off, glutton for a midget ga. Hold that thought. Kaneko, leave him alone, for a bit. You do know that you gave her the okay to beat him up afterwards, RIGHT. Yes. No one insults my peerage. And that includes my contracted magician. Fuck off, all of you. Pervert. Brah. Let's back up a little bit. After Rias invited the brunette to join them for the extermination of the stray devil, Issei complied, albeit reluctantly. Redeed decided to go to the stray devil's location via teleportation. Which could be done easily, since Issei bared her family crest on his right hand. Once the brunette joined the rest in the teleportation circle, he felt a little dizzy, for some reason. He didn't have the time to express his problem, though, because, with a flick of her fingers, Riaz activated the teleportation spell. Then, as soon as they arrived a short distance away from the abandoned warehouse the stray devil resided in, Issei jumped away from them and immediately started blowing whatever he had in his stomach through his mouth. Understandably, the devils were caught off guard by this development. At first, at least. The Keno was highly amused by the display, but her eyes showed an equal amount of disgust. Fabvl was the same, but he was fascinated as well. He had never seen anyone vomit so much. Also, he found the perfect opportunity to tease his friend and actually felt he would get away with it. Kaneko was just disgusted, her eyes expressing the sentiment in waves. Riaz was the only one that showed worry for the brunette. However, when he insulted Kaneko, she pouted childishly, her rosy cheeks puffed and her arms were crossed above her chest. On a side note, it was a one-time opportunity to see the Red Dragon Emperor on his hands and knees, which the devils might have enjoyed a little too much if their teasing was any indication. That said, it was equally disgusting that he threw up all the food he had eaten all day, which was surprisingly enough for 2 people. Idly, the devils wondered where all that food went, considering the brunette's more than attractive physique. Issei sighed in relief that his torture finally ended. He stood up slowly, still feeling a little dizzy, but otherwise fine. Then, he turned to face the clearly amused devils. Although Kaneko was just disgusted and Riaz was still pouting like a child, the Redeed's eyes showed some amusement at his predicament. The brunette glared dangerously at each one of them. Not a word to anyone. Never. He stressed the words with a warning growl. Without him knowing, Issei emitted a dark red, malicious aura, which clearly showed his intentions as to what he would do to them if they ever spoke about what happened a few moments ago. That, along with his now reptilian eyes, glaring at them with obvious anger, made the devils remember that they were talking to an agitated Securitate. Thus, they nodded their heads, their expressions being awkwardly serious, hiding the cold sweat running on the back of their necks. Good. Issei breathed deeply to calm his nerves and immediately regretted it. Fuck, he cursed as a particular scent entered his nostrils, making him glare at the abandoned warehouse. Noticing his change of focus, Riaz spoke. What is it, Ice? She asked in slight concern. I smelled something disgusting that came from the warehouse. And, now that I think about it, it's a wonder that I hadn't smelt it all this time that this stray devil resides in there. The brunette replied seriously, without looking at Riaz, with his eyes narrowing even more in suspicion. It's probably because the stray devil has erected a barrier that prevents outsiders from knowing what's happening there. Now, however, we're inside of it. Kiba said contemplatively, his posture screaming of his high alert at his friend's words. What did you smell? Kaneko demanded as she stared intensely at him. Issei grimaced as he took small sniffs to decipher what he was smelling. Once he did, he turned around and faced them with a horrified realization. Humans and blood, lots of blood. I can't even smell the stray devil because of how overwhelming the scent of blood is, he explained. To his intensified horror, the devils before him just narrowed their eyes in concentration. You knew something like this was happening? He exclaimed in an accusing tone. Yes. Riaz responded immediately, much to his still rising horror. At the very least, we expected as much. You just confirmed our suspicions, Ice. Good work. Issei ignored her praise and the matching smile she sent his way. Once her words sank in his head, all the horror turned to blinding rage. Once more, his dark green eyes turned reptilian as he stood in front of Riaz, glaring at her now narrowed eyes at his changed demeanor. None of them said a word until Kiba came to Issei's side and placed a hand on his shoulder to gain his attention. The blonde ignored the chill that ran down his spine when his friend's attention was on him as he spoke with seriousness. Ice-kun, I understand your anger, but you need to understand as well. Stray devils feast upon humans to gain more power. It's not our fault. It's their nature and it's our obligation to stop them from continuing their hideous acts. That's what we do, no matter if it's in the underworld or the human world. Issei scowled harshly at the explanation. Though, he did acknowledge his friend's words being genuinely true. Fine. He huffed as he turned around and started walking towards the warehouse in his usual way. The devils noticed that, even though the brunette made no sound with his footsteps, he felt heavy, for lack of an accurate word. They wasted no more time as they quickly caught up with him. He even allowed them to take the lead, since they would be the ones to deal with the stray devil, and he would just watch. The brunette's mood got even worse from then on. The scent of blood and rotting corpses got heavier the closer the group got. Once they went inside the warehouse, Issei was glad that he had nothing else to blow out from his stomach, even if the aforementioned body part churned due to his own disgust. Yet, his scowl never left his face. Issei stood at the doorway as the devils took some cautious steps inside and inspected the immediate area for any sign of the stray devil. Despite the heavy scent in the air, he could tell that the stray devil was straight ahead of them, hidden in the dark. It was easier to catch its scent from this close proximity. From then on, the Securitate tuned out every sound. Well, as much as he could, anyway. In his opinion, Ria's attempt to have a civil conversation with the stray devil, or visor as the Redeed called it, was completely unnecessary. Speaking of visor, it was an abomination that disgusted him even more. The upper half was of a slim, blonde woman with an ugly mouth full of sharp fangs, who also wore nothing on her, leaving her huge breasts bare for the world to see. The lower half was that of a huge spider, with the belly being a gigantic drooling mouth that also smelt like a vagina. Truly, it was the most disgusting being the brunette had ever seen, including mutated beasts in horror movies. Then, the battle began. Issei wasn't surprised by the display of Kiba's speed. After all, the blonde appeared to be a knight, as far as he remembered how the evil pieces went. He was, however, interested that the blonde appeared to be the wielder of sword birth, a sacred gear able to manifest all kinds of demonic swords. At least, that was Ria's explanation as far as Kiba's abilities were concerned. Kaneko was a one-trick pony, for a rook. From his position, Issei could see that the white-haired girl barely put any effort to throw visor around like a ragdoll, making it an easy target for Kiba to dissect with his sword. The brunette mentally agreed with Ria's statement that Kiba and Kaneko were an effective duo as they fought against visor. However, for the sake of his sanity, he ignored the fact that the abomination before them was able to squirt acidic fluids from her breasts. It was painful for his eyes alone. So, he focused on the effective duo's way of fighting visor as they used their dodges to further assault the abomination. Next was Akeno, who, according to Rias, was the queen of the peerage and was known as the priestess of thunder. Additionally, the Redeed called her the ultimate sadist as well. Something that he somewhat agreed on, judging from how turned on the brunette seemed to be from Visor's painful screams that turned to pitiful whimpers once Rias stopped her from electrocuting the stray devil. Issei was thankful for that. Visor's scent after Akeno's assault was almost enough to make him vomit again. Also, he thought of himself as an even bigger sadist than the brunette, which was something that had to be tested. There was no way, however, to test himself as the bottom. He wasn't a masochist. Period. Then, Ria stepped forward. Her entire demeanor screamed equal amounts of pride for her peerage, elegance and arrogance. Her any last words was followed by a black and red aura surrounding her body as she looked down on the pitifully whimpering visor, which, the brunette noticed, destroyed anything around her. Even her servants kept themselves at a safe distance. Essentially, he heard Akeno explaining that the power he witnessed was Ria's power of destruction, and the Redeed was known as the Crimson Ruin Princess in the underworld. As he watched Ria's making a small pile of ashes out of visor, Issei finally came to terms with the fact that, yes, there were beings that were beyond salvation, devils or otherwise. He hoped that he wouldn't meet any humans with the same traits in the future. Even as something in his gut told him that he just jinxed himself. So, what do you think, Ice? Ria's curious question brought him out of his thoughts and observations. The brunette decided to be honest with the Redeed as he noticed that all of them looked at him in anticipation. It seemed that his opinion mattered. A strange sensation, but not unwelcome. Honestly, despite Visor being weak compared to you, you guys were pretty good. Between Kaneko-san's and Kiba's teamwork, Akeno-san's thunder and your power of destruction, Visor didn't stand a chance. His analysis caused Rias to beam with pride as she gazed at all of her servants, who looked at her as well, minus the white-hair girl. Akeno had a faint dust of pink on her cheeks as she tittered behind her delicate hand. Kaneko averted her gaze from everyone, making Rias believe that she was shy when praised by others than herself. Kiba just hummed in appreciation, his perpetual kind smile appearing to be a little more genuine at the brunette's words for them. Rias turned to Issei, having the intention to thank him. However, her eyes widened in disbelief when she couldn't spot him. She voiced her surprise eloquently, getting the attention of the others as well. Akeno, Kaneko and Kiba blinked twice, sharing their king's disbelief at not seeing the brunette anywhere near them. Kaneko couldn't even sense him, which shocked her even more that he had disappeared from her radar in such a small amount of time, when no one's eyes were on him for a couple of seconds to boot. Even worse, there was the fact that he made no sound whatsoever. The devils suppressed several chills down their spines at the realization that Issei was, indeed, a truly dangerous individual to come across as an enemy. Internally, Ria's servants thanked their king for making him an ally of theirs. After all, he seemed to be dangerous enough for their king's personal problem to solve it on his own. Without them knowing, Rias was of the same mind on the matter. Those were their last thoughts as they wordlessly teleported back to the orc. Issei groggily opened his eyes, waking up for another day of school, albeit the last one for this week. He would have preferred to forget last night's events, but unfortunately for him, selective memory wasn't and would never be one of his abilities. The fact that both Dragons and Jetsu lectured him about individuals similar to, or worse than Visor, before beating the crap out of each other in a very deadly spar, didn't help his sour mood at all. His only consolation was that he would meet sweet, cute and innocent Asia this day or tomorrow. The brunette would have preferred to see her every day, but he didn't want to raise more suspicion on Rainer and Asia. So, just meeting the Italian nun once would be enough, for the time being. If only to see for himself that she was safe and unharmed. Speaking of, he wondered how Rainer was faring. The fallen angel hadn't communicated with them through Rias the last couple of days, and Issei didn't know how to feel about the silence. He sighed tiredly as he sat up on his bed. He made the minimum movements possible to stretch his body while sitting on the bed, the satisfying pops and cracks being music to his ears. Checking at his clock, he saw that he was up half an hour earlier than usual. And, since he had resigned from being the kendo club's shushu, he had plenty of time to prepare for school. Not to mention that he could eat breakfast with his parents. Which, now that he thought about it, might not be such a good idea. After all, Issei knew he would have to lie to them, partially at least. And Issei hated lying in any form. First of all, he knew that both his parents would fuss over his date, with his mother demanding to meet her and his father wanting nothing more than to embarrass him in front of said girlfriend. To which he would have to convince them that there was no girlfriend. Then, it would be the situation with the kendo club. The excuse he thought about using at his quitting from the club's shushu was that he would help the orc with their supposed research on the occult as an outside source and he would be paid by them. Questionable at best, but believable all the same. All that to assure his parents from his extended absence from the house. That said, Issei didn't want to lie to his parents. At least, not yet. So, he made another decision. He made his own breakfast, as was the norm for the past year, before preparing his lunch as well, leaving him half an hour before his parents woke up. As usual, the brunette made no noise as he prepared himself for school. Then, he left earlier than normal, wanting to go to the kendo club to practice all his skills in swordsmanship and, if he was lucky, some of his hand-to-hand combat skills, before he had a shower and classes started for the day. He was halfway to Kuo Academy when he realized that his day would suck even worse. Because, he felt more than saw that he had entered a barrier that was similar to the one Visor used around the warehouse, albeit stronger and even less noticeable. Even worse, there was only one scent in the air, and Issei recognized it immediately. Well, what do we have here? What is a human doing out so early in the morning, when it's still night outside? Don't you know it's dangerous, boy? The brunette turned his head slightly to the left, where some trees blocked a clear view towards a park. That was where the mocking voice came from. The person in question appeared from behind one of those trees and revealed themselves to be a middle-aged man in a gray suit with a matching fedora on his head. His eyes were narrowed in a mixture of amusement, arrogance and pure malice as he looked at Issei. Also, the man carried the same distinctive scent as Rainer, which only helped the brunette to come to the conclusion that Donosik had found him. This was bad. Fucking hell. The tension in the air rose to unbelievable levels as soon as Issei and Donosik locked gazes. The brunette wore a serious expression on his face as he glared at the fallen angel, while the latter looked all smug and arrogant. Donosik's demeanor raised some red flags in Issei's head. First of all, Rainer should have informed Rias about Donosik still seeking Issei. This didn't happen, which meant that Rainer had been compromised. Either by Asia or the original culprit didn't trust Rainer and made a change in leadership. Honestly, Issei hoped that it was the latter. At least, in that case, Rainer's possibility of being alive was way higher than being compromised by Asia. Even then, however, the brunette could still buy some time by showing Donosik that he was Ria's contracted magician, hoping that it would be enough to deter the fallen angel from doing something drastic. Speaking of the fallen angel, Donosik had closed the distance between them as the brunette thought about the possibilities, but had yet to make a move on him. The fallen seemed content to just stare at him, for the time being, which was good. It gave Issei more time to think on how to act. I see that you're alive and well, for a dead man. Rainer must have killed another person when she came back and told us that she had finished her mission. Maybe I should rectify that mistake of hers. Donosik spoke airily, albeit smugly, as he crossed his arms against his chest. Well, there went his time to think how to handle this. Issei narrowed his eyes in suspicion as he took a seemingly relaxed stance. No. She did try to kill me. It was Grimoire-san that healed me after Rainer left that night, leaving me bleeding to death. He responded, hoping that the fallen angel wouldn't follow through with his subtle threat and believe his blatant lie. The fact that he had to lie made him internally disgusted with himself, but it was the only way to avoid making the situation even worse. Issei raised a skeptical eyebrow. Gremory, you say? As in Ria's Gremory, one of the owners of Kuo? He asked. At the brunete's simple nod, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. What proof do you have for your claim, boy? He demanded. Issei raised his right hand, showing the back of his palm to Issei, where the Gremory crest was. Ah. Issei made a sound of recognition before his expression turned skeptical. But, you're not a devil. He stated. Issei understood the unheard question. I'm Ria-san's contracted magician. I didn't want to be reincarnated as a devil. He replied. That was true, even if the events were totally different as to how this happened. Oh. So, that's how it is. Issei sighed in a mixture of defeat and understanding as his shoulders seemed to relax a little, yet the brunette didn't let his guard down. Well, then. It seems that it was a misunderstanding on my part. He said politely as he fixed his fedora, but his eyes showed that he didn't truly mean his words. I'll take my leave, for now, boy. Pray that we won't meet again. He bid his farewell in a warning tone, before vanishing in a whirlpool of black feathers. As soon as the fallen angel left, Issei felt that the barrier disappeared as well, considering he could smell and hear all around again. However, Issei didn't take the tension with him. He left it all to fall on the brunette's shoulders. Issei cursed under his breath that he didn't learn anything about Rainer as he continued his way to Kuo Academy. There were many possibilities as to why Issei planned their meeting, and none of them were good as far as Rainer was concerned. The frustrated teen could only grit his teeth and hope that Rainer and Asia would be alright by the time he found the way to get them out of this mess. Hopefully, safe and unharmed. At the very least, he also hoped that his contract with Ria's would be enough to postpone any possible conflict with the group from the church. Issei sighed in frustration. The entire situation was getting out of hand and he had yet to think of a way to help Asia and Rainer without kick-starting another war between devils and fallen angels. The only good thing about his meeting with Issei was that the brunette didn't have to reveal his sacred gear. He knew that it would just cause many more problems rather than turning the situation in his favor. It was lunch break at the academy and Issei decided that he wanted all the peace and quiet he could get in order to eat his meal and, hopefully, think of a solution for the grand scheme he was, at the very least, a part of. So, the brunette headed to the most quiet place he could think of, the roof of the new building. And, because he was as noiseless as always, he wasn't followed by anyone. Although, his fellow students fearing him might have also been a factor as to why he was able to go up there without being followed. Thankfully, it took him only 5 minutes to reach the roof and start having his lunch. He practically inhaled the food from his bento in another 5 minutes, leaving him 20 to spare before he would have to get back to class. The brunette sat cross-legged, leaning against the wall, with a door to his left as his eyes gazed at the clear sky. So, what do you guys think? He asked curiously to no one in particular. Or, that would be the case if he didn't have two sentient beings in his soul that he could communicate with. Also, he needed all the help he could get. And those exact beings he was talking to were more experienced in difficult situations. Unfortunately, I have no experience in situations like the one you are in, partner. Bragg's apologetic words shot that hope to hell. Brutally. Issei sighed in defeat and his head almost touched his chest. Don't be like that, King. Zangetsu interjected, his tone unreadable, which was rare. Yes, you don't have enough information, but that doesn't mean you're completely helpless. What do you mean? Issei asked in confusion. For starters, you have me and the sword, not to mention the other two powers, should a conflict occur. Drake gained attention with his serious voice. Then, you have the devils as allies. You can ask this Ria's girl to get information about your ex's group from the underworld's resources, which can help you tremendously in your endeavor. The brunette nodded thoughtfully, taking the dragon's words seriously, while also noting that the sword didn't throw a temper tantrum at being called as such. I'll do that, but then, if it's that easy, why hasn't Ria-san done this herself? He asked in confusion. From the beginning she had said that she didn't want to start a war, just like you. Unfortunately, a fight is unavoidable in this case. Clearly, the one behind the scenes made things in such a way that the devils would have to fight the fallen angels in the church. The question is, how many puppets do they have in that group and how many will get out of the inevitable fight alive? Zangetsu explained, sounding unusually serious. Issei breathed another defeated sigh, acknowledging the spirit's words and begrudgingly accepting the fact that there would be a fight, one way or another. Fine. So, I just have to ask Ria-san to use the underworld's resources. He confirmed the plan of action. Then, what? He asked curiously. You'll act according to the information you'll receive, partner. Drake replied patiently. That said, I have to warn you that it may take a small while for the devils to get the information you need to proceed. It might take more than a day. He added in a thoughtful tone. Great, the brunette sighed in frustration at that. And what about the possibility of Ria-san rejecting my request? He asked. She won't. Zangetsu replied with certainty, making the brunette blink in surprise at the sword spirit sentiment. If she's as prideful as I think, then she'll want to keep her name clean. Meaning that she'll use your request as an attempt to raise her own reputation in her peers in the underworld. Well, this doesn't make her sound good as a person, since, after all, she's a devil and not a human. It works fine for you. He explained. Well, you're not wrong, Issei acknowledged the point with a reluctant sigh as he gazed back at the sky with an unreadable expression. You just need to stop overthinking things, partner. Drake told him wisely. I guess Issei conceded with a small sigh before he checked the time on his phone. Well, I have 10 minutes until lunch break ends. He muttered under his breath before he stood up and dusted off his clothes. Thanks for the help, guys. He muttered gratefully as he opened the roof's door, ready to descend the staircase to head back to class. Think nothing of it, partner. Clearly, Drake wanted to say more, but left it at that, his tone sounding a little emotional, for a reason that Issei couldn't even come close to understanding as to why. Don't sweat it, King. While Zangetsu was dismissive, the brunette took notice of a hint of appreciation. Instead of questioning his tenants about those small details, Issei just smiled to no one and accepted their words as they were as he descended the stairs. They had helped him tremendously to clear his mind of all the unnecessary thoughts. But the goal in his mind for after school, the brunette went to his class with a smile on his face, confusing anyone who saw him on his way there in the process. He could have done without the perverted duo's curses, though. Those guys were getting annoying as they threatened to kill him themselves for his good looks. That said, they managed to give him an idea in case Riaz refused his request. Riaz was looking at the brunette in consideration. He had just asked her, kindly of course, to use her connections to the underworld in order to learn as much as they could about Rainer's group. She was frustrated that she hadn't thought of it first, as much as she was irritated about Issei's persistence of saving Rainer and Asia. Why did he care about those two so much? Why couldn't he care the same way about her too? Or, even better, only herself? It wasn't like he had spent so much time with them as he did with herself and her servants. As frustrating as these thoughts were, she couldn't voice them. Instead, she decided to focus on the task at hand. For now. Bakeno, please make the call and relay Issei's request on my behalf. The redeed ordered professionally, albeit kindly, her eyes not leaving the brunette that was seated on the couch to her left, from where he stared straight at her own eyes with seriousness. Yes, Riaz Butchu. Akeno responded in kind, having read the mood as she produced a magic circle on her left ear in order to relay the message to the Archduke. Only then did Issei bow his head at Riaz in what she presumed was gratefulness. He even gave her a sincere smile once he raised his head, making her heart skip a beat. Yet, her only visible reaction to that was to send his way a matching smile of her own. Riaz Butchu, it's done. An information gathering squad will be sent within an hour. Also, the Grigori will be contacted, but it's doubtful that they'll answer immediately. Akeno announced softly, albeit professionally. It managed to bring Riaz back from her reverie. Thanks Akeno. She said simply as she smiled at her best friend and queen. A comfortable silence followed, with everyone doing their own thing or having their own thoughts. Riaz, for example, thought that making the request on her behalf was only because she thought that she was protecting her contracted magician from the underworld's attention. Sure, it would boost her name that she took a correct decision on the matter, but it was the absolute last thing on her mind as far as she was concerned. Issei didn't show it, but he was glad that he didn't have to use underhanded methods to persuade Riaz to do what she did for his request without resistance. That said, since he wasn't a mind reader, he didn't know what she was thinking. Especially since he couldn't read her expression either. Akeno opted to go to the kitchenette to prepare dinner for everyone, including Issei, to distract her mind off of the apparent interest the brunette had for a fallen angel and her disgust over the matter. In her mind, she hoped that Rainer wouldn't be excused in case they were allowed to raid the church and take down everyone in it. Due to that man, she hated her original lineage, Akka the Fallen Angels, with a fierce passion. Kaneko was just munching on her sweets, seemingly not paying attention to anyone or anything around her. That, however, wasn't the case. She had listened to the brunette's request, which left her conflicted. On one hand, she was suspicious of the brunette for reasons even herself couldn't explain. On the other hand, she just wanted this situation to end so she could focus on how her sweets tasted, not just eating them out of habit and using them as an excuse to not attract any attention. That, and she was pretty sure that her king's personal problem was right around the corner, for which she had no idea as to how to help her king. And she refused to use the power of her heritage to do so. Even the thought of that power sent a shiver down her spine. She just hoped that the brunette's help with her king's problem would be enough. As for Kiba, he was the only truly calm person in the room. The blonde had heard the small conversation and how it had turned out as he was reading his book. In his mind, whatever his king ordered, he would perform with no questions asked, as an honorable knight should do. And the blonde believed himself as one. That, and he trusted both Riaz and Issei to make the correct decisions for their regrettably little group. In fact, he trusted his brunette friend enough to the point that he believed his friend would be the catalyst they needed for his king's personal problem, no matter if it knocked on their door as soon as they finished with this mess. Dinner is ready. Akeno's cheery announcement brought everyone out of their musings. As she served everyone on the coffee table, Issei was surprised that her food smelt and looked almost as good as his mother's. The girls situated themselves at the opposite couch of the one Issei and Kiba occupied in order for everyone to be comfortable. After a collective itadakimasu, the teens started having their meal. Once Issei tasted the food, he made eye contact with its creator. "Your food is exquisite, Akeno-san." He praised sincerely with a small smile. Akeno was momentarily surprised at the compliment, if the blink of her eyes and her admittedly cute expression was any indication. Thank you for the compliment, Hidu-kun, she tittered when she collected herself, before returning to her own food. Issei did so as well, having taken an inner satisfaction to the fact that he managed to bring a faint dust of pink on her cheeks. Riaz was glad that her contracted magician didn't refuse their unspoken invitation for dinner, but she could have done without the unintentional flirting between her queen and said magician. The rest of the dinner was spent in silence, with the devils being utterly surprised by the brunette's excellent table manners. Especially when he made less noise with his utensils than themselves. Yet, they didn't dare to ask about this. Apparently, Sona had tried to ask him as to why he was so silent in his moves and failed to get an answer. A verbal one, that is. So, Riaz ordered her servants to not ask about this matter unless the brunette opened up to them. That, however, didn't mean they were less curious about it. Especially Riaz herself, followed closely by Kiba. Once everyone was done with their meal, Akeno was about to start cleaning up the coffee table, but someone else beat her to it. "I'll clean up. It's the least I can do after I was treated to such a wonderful meal." Issei's announcement as he stood up from the couch with his own plate in hand, accompanied with a smile that made Riaz and Akeno's heart skip a couple of beats, caught all the devils off guard. Including Kaneko, if her slightly widened eyes at his direction were any indication. Akeno exclaimed in pleasant surprise, being the first to regain her composure somewhat. "I didn't expect that allow me to help you, no, can I call you Ice-kun?" "Nah." Issei gently turned down her offer with a shake of his head, being internally amused about her reaction. He kept his smile in place as he looked at her. "I help my mother whenever I can at home, so it's no problem for me, Akeno-san." He explained briefly, much to the further surprise of the devils. "You can call me however you want, though. After all, I'm not one for formalities." He added as an afterthought before he started to pick up all the plates in a careful manner. The brunette just giggled behind her delicate hand at his response before she nodded in acknowledgement. Riaz just smiled at the interaction. She wanted to meet Issei's parents, if only to see what kind of people were the ones that raised such a kind securite. Kiba was about to offer his help but thought better of it. Akeno wouldn't stop teasing them if he did. So, he settled to just send his friend a grateful smile and a nod. Kaneko stared intensely at him as if she was trying to decipher his character by just looking at him. Just as the brunette was about to go to the kitchenette, the Redeed remembered something. "Ice." Riaz called out to him. The brunette hummed at her in question. "Can you perform a contract tonight, please?" Riaz asked politely. At his questioning gaze, complete with a small tilt of his head, which she and Akeno found cute, she elaborated. Kaneko is double booked tonight at one of her contracts. It's simply impossible for her to be in two places at once. Akeno and Yudo had their own contracts at that time as well. So, that's why I'm requesting your help. Issei didn't even think about rejecting this. After all, he would be paid from the contract. Of course. Just tell me when and where it is. He said with an easy tone. Right before he turned around, he paused and added in a serious tone. I'll go there on foot, though. There's no way I'm using the teleportation circle unless you know a spell to erase my motion sickness. Kiba held himself from laughing at the last moment, with Akeno being the complete opposite. The brunette didn't even hide her amused giggles at the brunette's admittedly funny weakness. Kaneko just deadpanned at him, but didn't make a comment. Riaz just smiled in amusement. Very well. Just make sure to be there on time. Issei, just barely, held back a round of curses. Instead, he grumbled under his breath as he went to the kitchenette. When he was on his way for the contract, something told him that this night would suck as well. His suspicion was proven correct once he was at a close distance from the client's house. From there, he saw something transparent covering it, which he guessed was a barrier, considering that, from the outside, he couldn't smell or listen to the client. I hate it when my gut is right. Issei sighed in dejection as he stepped forward, a defeated expression on his face. Issei grimaced as soon as he stepped inside the barrier. The scent of blood was very fresh and equally overwhelming. Much to his curiosity and worry, though, it was mixed with rosemary. Meaning that there was a high possibility of a priest to be present and, after another sniff, Asia as well. The latter's presence only made him more worried. Especially when he noticed that the client's door was slightly ajar. Unfortunately, the door made a creaking sound when he opened it enough to enter, making him aware that he lost the element of surprise. Yet, when he stepped into the house, he made no sound, as usual. Also, he noticed that the house's lights were all off. It didn't matter to him, however. After all, with his more than extraordinary eyesight, he could see perfectly in the dark. At the floor, he saw a trail of blood, which he dreadfully followed. The trail led him to the living room, where he stopped and his eyes widened in horror at the sight before him. A middle-aged man was crucified upside down, with his own expression of utter horror, mixed with absolute pain. It seemed he had died very recently, but in the most excruciating way possible. The man's belly was cut open, and his intestines were spilling out in a very disgusting display. Above the man, there was a written message, seemingly with the victim's blood, which read "No rest for the wicked" in a very messy fashion. Issei barely managed to force the bile in his throat back to his stomach at what his eyes were seeing. His breathing became a little ragged, and his heartbeat rose at dangerous levels. For a normal human, at least. Oh, you're not a shitty devil, I was expecting a shitty devil, not a human brat like you. Issei regained his senses at the sound of a youthful yet crazy voice coming from his right. Once he turned his utterly furious gaze towards the speaker, he saw why it sounded as such. On the couch at the end of the room was sitting a young man, seemingly in his late teens or early 20s, with shoulder-length white hair and a priest's outfit. Yet, the brunette could tell that this priest had a slim, albeit athletic build underneath the clothes. Also, the priest's expression was the embodiment of lunacy, with white silver eyes, a deranged grin and his tongue hanging limply at the left corner of his mouth. Lastly, he held what seemed like a pistol in his left hand, while on his right one there was something like a flashlight. "You're the one who did this." Issei growled angrily as his now narrowed eyes turned to reptilian slits, glaring down dangerously at the seated priest. The priest's grin somehow widened at that, with the brunette noticing with inner disgust that there was pride in it. "Yesses, I was the one who did thisu like it, udon''t. I don't see I don't see aare after all. I cut down a devil scum believerooooh. The name's Fried Sellzen by the way. The now identified Fried Selzen ranted in a crazy manner, before his expression showed a little curiosity. What's your name, are you a devil believer as well? If you are, I have to kill you, uknowyees I'll have to killyu. My name is Haidu Issei. The brunette introduced himself, growling like a beast ready to pounce on its prey. And you're killing no one else tonight, you bastard. He added in the same tone as he took a seemingly relaxed stance. Fried's expression turned gleeful as he spoke. So, you're the brat that useless bitch for a fallen angel was supposed to kill, and you're another devil believer, that's not good, that's not good at all, uknow, I'll kill you, now by bye. He sang excitedly and, at the end of his ranting, he raised his left hand and pulled the trigger thrice, aiming at the brunette's head. To Issei's curiosity, the bullets he avoided by simply moving his head left and right were a pure white substance. Fried stared in utter disbelief that the human before him dodged his bullets without any effort to speak of. Hey that's not possible, uknow a human dodging holy bullets isn't possible, uknow, he ranted, again. The brunette had enough of the priest's craziness. Fried didn't blink. Yet, when Issei moved, he was inside Fried's guard, with his right fist already cocked back and a shiny black substance covering it. Fried froze in shock at that development, his eyes wide in pure disbelief, and just barely managed to voice a surprised sound. Then, the brunette's fist came straight at Fried's nose, with enough power to instantly knock him out cold and make him crash onto the wall behind him. Issei ignored the disgusting crunch Fried's nose made as it broke, and his anger didn't lessen in the slightest, even as he watched the priest falling limply to the floor, staining it with his own blood that came out from his nose. Fucking bastard. The brunette gritted his teeth in anger. He hoped that he had caused, at the very least, a concussion with that punch. His ears twitched as he heard hurried footsteps coming his way, and he suddenly remembered that Fried wasn't, in fact, alone. He turned his head to face the entrance to the living room, just in time to confirm his earlier assumption. Asia was the one that rushed into the room. Fucking hell. And, because of the position of the entrance, the Italian nun had a first-row view of Fried's victim. Father Fried. I heard some gunshots. Is everything Asia's frantic concern turned into pure unadulterated horror when her eyes landed on the upside-down crucified man, if her terrified, high-pitched screech was any indication. Tears ran down from her eyes at the sight before her. For some reason, Issei calmed down considerably at Asia's mere presence. Asia-chan. He called out softly. Asia's head snapped at the direction of his voice, and her eyes widened in disbelief at his presence. Issei, what is Issei doing here? Where is Father Fried? Her worry equaled her shock over the situation as she fired the questions in a rapid succession. Issei moved calmly and knelt in front of Asia, keeping the respectable distance of an arm's length as he placed his hands on her shoulders in order to make her focus on him. Calm down, Asia-chan. He said in a soothing voice. Selzen-san, he grimaced slightly at the mere mention of the priest's name. Was the one who killed this man. I knocked him out and he's behind the couch. He explained with the same soothness, nodding his head in the direction of said couch. Asia seemed to calm down enough that she wasn't about to have a heart attack as her green, sad, confused and worried eyes stared at Issei's dark green, calm and soothing ones. Why did Father Fried kill this man? She asked in a sad manner. Because, apparently, this man was about to have a contract with the devil. The brunette explained briefly. Then, Issei is a devil. The nun asked in a mixture of confusion, worry and fear. No, Asia-chan. Despite the situation, Issei smiled. He would have to talk with his tenants later. Her presence affected him too much, albeit in a good way. Unnaturally so. I'm just a contracted magician to one of the devils in this town. He explained, retracting his right hand and showing it back to Asia. The nun's eyes widened in surprise, wonder and amazement before she returned her gaze at the brunette. Issei is a magician, that's amazing. She exclaimed. Yeah. Issei agreed with a nod of his head, his smile widening. I'll show you some other time, Asia-chan. He promised softly. Asia's eyes lit up with hope at the declaration, but then, she suddenly remembered something, and her expression fell. Noticing the change in her demeanor, Issei's gut churned. What is it, Asia-chan? He asked softly, his expression showing concern. Asia flinched at the question, but answered anyway, her voice equally soft and sad. It's about Rainer-sama. What about her, Asia-chan? He asked in genuine concern. You can tell me. He probed. Rainer-sama, she's not the leader anymore, Issei, she muttered sadly as her eyes focused on the ground to hide her tears, indirectly confirming one of the brunette's fears on the entire mess. Everyone at the church has to obey Donaseek-sama's orders, and Rainer-sama is held chained in a cell where Kalwerner-sama and Mitlet-sama beat her up continuously. And then, they make me heal her to start all over again, she explained in between her hiccups as she couldn't control herself and cried, launching herself to the brunette's chest to do so. Issei wasn't surprised by the revelation, but by no means was he less angry as he hugged the nun in a comforting fashion, rubbing soothing circles on her back. Is there anything else you can tell me, Asia-chan? He asked as calmly as he could. Her crying increased twofold at his question, but she answered nonetheless. Tomorrow will be my last day of free freedom, Issei, at the end of the day, Donaseek-sama will perform a ritual to extract my gift from God. If they extract her sacred gear, she'll die, partner. Very painfully, at that. Drake explained to him mentally, having heard the entire conversation through his wielder. Despite his inner fury reaching a boiling point, Issei held back his emotions and remained as calm as possible. He didn't want to disturb Asia. Speaking of whom. We'll have a talk later, Drake. Issei all but demanded from the dragon. His only response to that was the mental equivalent of an affirming grunt before the link between them was cut off from the brunette himself. Listen, Asia-chan. Issei spoke soothingly, not breaking the embrace. Tomorrow, we'll spend as much time as we can together. Just meet me at the park where we first saw each other. He promised. Instead, Asia was the one to separate from the embrace, and her teary eyes looked at him full of hope. You mean it, Issei? Issei smiled down at her. Of course, Asia-chan. He nodded in affirmation. He refrained from telling her that he would save her and Rainer. After all, there was a chance that he could be a little too late in case he would have to convince Riaz the hard way. Assuming, of course, that the devils in his school didn't have the okay to raid the church. Also, he would make sure that Rainer would be spared from the inevitable bloodshed. His musings were cut off as his ears twitched at the sound of two pairs of flapping wings in the distance. Probably the cleanup crew. And, since Rainer was out of the equation and Danasak was the leader, that left the last two, Kalwerner and Mitlet. Asia-chan, I need to go. To her saddened expression, he elaborated. Fallen angels are coming here, probably to take care of everything here. Asia was visibly saddened that she would be separated from him, but nodded in understanding. See you tomorrow, Asia-chan. Issei bid his farewell as he stood up and left in his usual way, leaving the saddened nun behind. Said nun went and healed Fried's injury just before the two fallen angels landed outside of the house. By the time the two fallen angels went to the dead man's house, Issei entered the old school building, heading towards the orc. Without knocking, the brunette opened the door to find all the devils inside, who were surprised by his early return. Riaz exclaimed in surprise, before noticing his serious demeanor. Why are you back so quickly? What happened with the contract? She fired off her questions in rapid succession as she stood up from her chair behind her desk. Issei didn't answer as he went straight to the Redeed's desk without breaking eye contact with her. Something that unnerved the devils. Especially when he placed his hands on Riaz's desk to give him leverage to lean a little forward, which put him within Riaz's guard. The priest by the name of Fried Selzen was there before me and killed my contract, and Asia-chan was the one to erect a barrier around the house. The brunette revealed in a serious voice. Ignoring Riaz's shocked expression and the others' hitching breaths, he continued his explanation. I knocked out the priest easily, but I'm pretty sure Asia-chan healed him after I left. Asia-chan had no idea Selzen-san was going to kill my contract, by the way. Also, she told me that Rainer isn't their leader anymore. In fact, Rainer is a prisoner of theirs, getting beaten up by her own peers. Lastly, Asia-chan pretty much told me that tomorrow night is when Donasek and the others will make their final move. He avoided telling them Donasek's entire plan in case Riaz wanted to take advantage of Asia's death. That way, once they raided the church, Riaz would be hellbent to kill everyone there, hopefully not including Rainer, before reincarnating Asia into a devil due to the latter's admittedly invaluable sacred gear. Unsurprisingly, the devils were shocked at all these revelations, with Riaz being the most out of the four. Redeed shook her head to regain her bearings before leveling Issei with a serious expression of her own. Ice, even if all what you just said is true. It is, the brunette interrupted her through his gritted teeth, hissing as he spoke. Riaz continued like his interruption never happened in the first place. Don't have permission from the Archduke to raid the church. As of yet, the Grigori haven't sent a word as to what status the group from the church has to them. She explained seriously, yet patiently. Issei stayed there for a moment, staring at her eyes for any sign of deceit. Finding none, he took his hands from the Redeed's desk and he didn't say anything until he reached the door on his way out. In the meantime, the devils were watching him in a mixture of worry, suspense and a little bit of dread. Especially because his head was leaning a little forward, hiding his expression from them. Which was something that the devils had as a telltale that Issei was upset. Once the brunette grabbed the doorknob, he spoke, his voice dead even and equally serious. Riaz-san, everyone, I don't care if your status in the underworld will be affected. Just know that I will go and save Rainer and Asia-chan tomorrow night, with or without your help. With that, he opened the door and exited the room, closing the door behind him, while also leaving behind a group of speechless devils staring at the door in pure disbelief. A couple of moments later, Riaz regained her composure and sighed in frustration, rubbing the bridge of her nose as she sat back on her chair, momentarily ignoring the worried look she got from her servants. At the same time, as he walked towards his home, Issei revealed his facial expression to no one, showing pure, unadulterated determination to follow through with his promise. Inside him, Dragon's Anjetsu smirked in anticipation for the following night. Finally, their wielder would use some of his skills in action. Issei opened his eyes to find himself in his bedroom, lying on his bed as he stared at his white ceiling. Again, the thought of putting a wallpaper of some kind crossed his mind. The brunette got up and stretched with swift, yet noiseless moves, sighing in relief when the pops and cracks all around his body relaxed his tense muscles. Apparently, fighting in his mind against Dragon's Anjetsu affected his body as well, in more ways than one. Speaking of his two tenants, Issei learned why Asia affected his whole being so much, on a very unnatural level. The Italian nun, apart from her sacred gear, Twilight Healing, had a trait that was very rare amongst humans, or even other species. She was a dragon tamer. According to Drake, whenever a dragon finds a person with that trait, they do whatever they can to protect that person, even risking their own life. Also, more often than not, a dragon and a dragon tamer mate with one another if their genders differ from each other. For that to happen, however, the dragon had to have a human form. Upon Issei's question why he felt that way about Asia, the dragon's answer was very simple. Issei was the wielder of the boosted gear, making him the host of Drake, a dragon. And a very powerful one at that. Add his dragon-slaying abilities, which, as the name suggested, probably originated from a dragon, and the boosted gear affected the wielder's body and personality, making them more of a dragon than a human. Issei didn't need any further explanation from that point. In hindsight, it explained why it had been easier to agitate him as of late. The same went to his quick adaptation at horrific scenes, like the one from last night or when the devils killed Visor. Not to mention his growing desire to vent his frustration in a very violent way. After all, his deadly spars with dragons and Jetsu wouldn't do anything at this point since he just got more frustrated that he couldn't beat them and he couldn't use his dragon-slaying abilities. Also, according to Drake, while the brunette had gotten stronger, he needed a catalyst to achieve his balance breaker, the final form of the boosted gear. And again, there was this juggernaut drive that Drake had mentioned once or twice but was vehemently against this form, seemingly out of concern for Issei's well-being. While the brunette was touched, he was again frustrated that Drake wouldn't tell him the entire story behind this juggernaut drive form. Issei shook his head to clear it from all thoughts. Today he was going to have an amazing time with Asia and then, at night, he would go and save her and Rainer from their fate. Putting on a clean set of a red tracksuit and taking his wallet with him, the brunette got out of his room to go and have breakfast with his parents before he headed out. Indeed, the time Issei spent with Asia was amazing, in the former's mind. The nun was happily and innocently smiling all day long through whatever the duo did. Her unintentional cuteness while doing so was just a bonus in Issei's book. He showed her everything his hometown had to offer, minus the movies, just one movie was too long and their time together was limited to begin with. The funny part of the day was when Asia had to order a burger, where her determination to do this on her own was just too cute for Issei to stop it immediately. Alas, he took pity on the cashier and the line waiting behind him and the nun, ordering the same as himself for her. It didn't end there, though. Since she had lived a very sheltered life, Asia didn't even know how to begin to eat the burger and fries. Her amazement about discovering such a simple thing was just too cute to watch as well. Her cute and shy gratefulness when Issei got her a small stuffed version of Ratchkun from a crane machine outside of the arcade, where the two spent an hour of having fun with all the games inside, was the icing on the cake. All in all, Issei's heart had melted from happiness, which, apparently, was the same sentiment that Asia felt. However, that's where all the good things ended. The Italian nun was so overwhelmed by her happiness that her inner dam with her negative emotions broke in a spectacular fashion, making her speak of her past. Asia was an abandoned child, raised in an orphanage of the church at a very early age. When she was 8, she discovered her sacred gear, Twilight Healing, which she herself dubbed as a gift from God, by healing a puppy. From then on, she was revered as a holy maiden, performing miracles by healing all kinds of diseases and injuries, lethal or not. That is, until she healed a heavily injured devil that had suddenly fallen in front her. At the yard of a church. In Italy. Then, somehow, someone saw and all hell broke loose. Those who worshipped her all but shunned and cursed her for being able to heal a devil with God's gift. She was excommunicated and thrown out of the place she called home her entire life. Then, the fallen angels took her in, making Asia hopeful that there would be a place where she belonged. Yet, in the end, she was to die in the most excruciating way possible, by the very people she thought would be her saviors. What a tragic irony. As if all that wasn't enough, she had grown up all alone, even if she was surrounded by people all her life. Just like Issei himself. Unlike the brunette, however, Asia never knew the term friendship. And he set that goal in his mind. To teach the nun what friendship is. As Asia cried that God had put her in another test, Issei turned his attention inwards as he gazed at the clear blue sky. Drake. He called out mentally with an eerily calm tone. The dragon picked up on it but didn't comment on it. What is it, partner? If this God of the Bible is still around, I'm gonna pound him to the kingdom come for what he's put Asia-chan through. And for sealing you and Albion in your respective sacred gears while I'm at it. He stated in the same tone as before. For the first time in his life, sealed or not, the dragon in the boosted gear was rendered speechless and couldn't even try to form a fitting response. Zangetsu, on the other hand, was laughing his ass off in both excitement and amusement. The brunette didn't even wait for the dragon to regain his bearings as he focused on the nun beside him on the same bench he had sat with Rainer on their date. Asia-chan. He called out softly, with an unnatural calmness that the nun was too innocent to pick up on. Why yes, Issei. She turned to face him with a small smile on her face once she cleaned up the last of her tears. She felt a pleasant chill run down her spine upon looking at his eyes. You're my friend. His simple declaration brought forth another round of tears, although, unlike before, these ones were of happiness. Thank you, Issei. Thank you so much. She choked a little in her own tears as she hugged him for all his worth. The brunette returned the embrace, though his arms wrapped around the blonde in a soft comforting fashion, just like last night. His ears and nose twitched as he caught the presence of a female fallen angel coming towards them. He was annoyed that his moment with Asia was about to be ruined, but he knew it would happen sooner or later, considering that it was early afternoon, a mere couple of hours before the sunset. Issei knew he had very little time before the fallen angel arrived. So he leaned in her ear. Asia-chan. Tonight, I'll come and save you and Rainer from that church. I don't know if the devil I'm contracted to will come as well, but I don't care. I'll definitely come and save you. He whispered softly, albeit with absolute certainty, which managed to shock the nun enough to stop crying out of sheer disbelief. Don't say a word to anyone, especially Rainer. He continued. Just endure until tonight and I'll come for you too. That's a promise, Asia-chan. And, after that, I'll do whatever I can to make you happy and be the good friend that you need. He finished, gently squeezing Asia in his embrace. To his inner surprise, the blonde didn't respond with more tears as he expected. Then, me and Rainer-sama will wait for you, Issei. She smiled warmly at him as she slightly broke the embrace, her green eyes shining in hope and joy. The brunette was so mesmerized by them that he barely caught himself from leaning in and kissing the nun. Unfortunately, their moment ended with the arrival of the fallen angel. There you are, Asia. I've been looking for you. Asia jumped on her seat in surprise and a little bit of embarrassment at being caught in an intimate moment with her friend. Issei turned towards the serious, mature voice's direction and saw the bombshell that was Kalawiner. She looked like she was in her mid to late 20s, with long blue hair that reached to her waist, and a few strands of her front hair covered her left eye. Her visible right eye was a matching blue color. She was as tall as himself, with a voluptuous figure and curves in the right places. Her bust size was the same as Rainer's and Ria's. She wore a maroon business suit, which showed a great amount of cleavage, and the skirt stopped to her mid-thighs. The pair of two black feathered wings on her back retracted and disappeared from view the moment she stepped on the park's pavement. If she wasn't an enemy, Issei wouldn't have minded doing the deed with her. She was like Sona in the personality department, which was his favorite. On a side note, the boosted gears and his dragon-slaying abilities' influence affected his hormones too. Which was one more reason he paid attention to the females around him. All these observations lasted for just a second. Ah. Kalawiner-sama. Asia exclaimed in surprise, bringing him out of his musings in the process. Kalawiner glanced briefly at the seemingly calm brunette, noting in her mind that it was Issei Haidu, the boy that should be dead by Rainer's hands, but was a contracted magician to Ria's grimoire. A fact that she confirmed for herself, since she saw the grimoire crest on the back of his right hand and he didn't give off the feeling of a devil. Then, she returned her eyes to the nun. It's time to go, Asia. There is an injured person in the church and the ritual will start when the moon is up. She explained stoically. In his mind, Issei understood that the injured person was Rainer and whatever ritual she was talking about was the one to extract Asia's twilight healing. To his credit, he didn't show how utterly furious he was. He was keeping it inside him in order to express all that anger at the right time. Asia's expression saddened as she nodded at the fallen angel, but still held a smile on her face when she turned to her friend. Goodbye, Issei. She bid him farewell in a soft tone. Yeah, see ya, Asia-chan. Issei responded in kind. The nun went towards Kalawiner with slow, hesitant steps, something that the brunette noticed yet didn't comment on. Since the boy seemed to be none the wiser about tonight and didn't make a fuss about Asia going with her, she didn't care in the slightest. Also, the fallen angel knew she couldn't attack him without incurring the grimoire devil's wrath, which would be counterproductive in their plans for tonight. When the nun reached her, the latter turned around and waved one last time at her friend before, in a vortex of black feathers, the two women vanished in thin air. The brunette boy gazed at the sky as he spoke aloud, but not loud enough to be heard by a passerby. Do you two mind if I use you tonight? He asked calmly, despite his more than boiled anger. Are you kidding? King Zangetsu raged in his head. It's the perfect opportunity to introduce me to the devils and put on a show about it. Course and I don't mind. I don't mind either, partner. Drake gave his own okay, albeit way calmer than his roommate. Issei got the impression that the dragon inside him wanted to say a lot more, but the latter held himself back, for some reason. That said, the brunette got what he wanted from the two and didn't have the clear mind to question any further. Thanks, guys. With that, the brunette stood up from the bench and, with an unnaturally calm smile on his face, he went towards his home. After all, he had a sword to pick up from there, one that he didn't want to be seen floating through the town to get in his hand. The sun had just set in Kuo. At the Orc, Riaz was at her desk, working on her paperwork, with a kendo by her side as usual. The same could be said for Kiba and Kaneko. The former read his book on the couch he occupied whenever his friend was there, while the latter munched on some sweets opposite of him. What wasn't usual was the tension in the room as they waited for the Archduke to call them about what to do with the group at the abandoned church. Earlier in the day, the information gathering squad that was sent by the Archduke himself had confirmed what Issei had told them the night before. Well, technically, what Asia told the brunette. Since the Archduke was informed of the situation, it was important for the gathered information to reach Grigori. Or, more accurately, their leader, Azazel himself. Unfortunately, due to mistrust between the two races, that wasn't as easy as it sounded. That said, it was only a matter of time before they got the okay to raid the church, or so Riaz hoped. Unexpectedly for Three Devils, Kaneko flinched violently in her attempt to reach for another cookie, immediately making the rest to be on high alert. What is it, Kaneko? Riaz asked worriedly, albeit seriously. Instead of answering verbally, Kaneko turned to face her and, for what had felt like an eternity for all parties present, the white-haired girl's emotionless mask had broken. Riaz, Akeno and Kiba were shocked to see that, not only did Kaneko seem genuinely terrified of something, but she was also trembling uncontrollably. Yet, when she spoke, her voice was clear as day, albeit equally scared shitless. Issei-senpai is here. And he's absolutely furious. This is the end of the video. If you enjoyed the story, then hit the like button and comment your favorite part, but for now see you all in the next video.